Hello everyone, it's Hoplite Mike, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing a review of the Rome Retrofit mod, which is available on the Steam Workshop for Rome Remastered. Now I would call this a light overhaul mod. There are a huge number of new factions, there's some new mechanics, and the campaign map is edited slightly, but the units and buildings are generally in line with the vanilla game. Firstly, I just want to say that I do recognise the amount of work that goes into these mods, so nothing I say in this video is intended to be criticism, but more to give people an idea of what to expect from the mod and if it might be of interest. I should also state that, like with most mods, they are continuously being worked on, so this is not the final version of the mod, but it was released in January 2022, so I would consider that a decent amount of time has elapsed since release. Firstly, I'm going to go over the campaign map. So it is similar to the base game, but there are some new settlements added in, such as Aegon and Ambracia, and if you go into the far corners of the map, you'll see that some of the more remote settlements have also been removed, such as in the desert and in the far north as well. And the overall result is that the campaign map resembles something a lot closer to the Rome 2 Total War campaign map. And this is something I do quite like, because the settlements in the remote areas can take sort of 2 or 3 turns to get to, and because they are so remote and they don't have much trade income, they're not really worth going for. However, if they are owned by a different faction, they will continuously harass your borders, so it just becomes a bit of a nuisance. So I do quite like the fact that the campaign map has been edited slightly. It means that you don't have those settlements in the middle of nowhere that aren't really worth going for, and a lot of the fighting is now more condensed into the important areas. So overall, there's nothing too crazy with the campaign map, but definitely some positive changes, I would say. The next aspect I'd like to talk about is the number of factions, which I'd say is one of the flagship features of this mod. If you go to the ranking screen, you'll be able to see all the factions that start on the campaign map, and if you were to count them, you would find that there are 85. Because civil wars are possible in this mod, every faction has its own shadow or secessions faction, which means the number of potential factions on the campaign map is actually double what you see here. So I would say this is a particularly immersive aspect of this mod, is the fact that it's a lot more historically accurate with the factions. So for example, instead of just having Greek city-states, you've got Sparta, Athens, Pergamum, and Syracuse. And if you were to go, for example, to the Gallic areas, you'd find the different factions. So you've got the Averni and the Nervi, and you can really see this when you zoom out, how many different factions there are. All the different colours there. So yeah, this is a huge plus for this mod. It's a very immersive, much more varied than the main game. There's a whole host of factions you can play. I think there's only a certain number that are playable when you select Imperial Campaign, but there is a way to be able to play the factions which are not appearing there. But yeah, this is a massive plus of this mod. The next aspect I'd like to talk about is buildings and units. I really just have this in for completeness, because there isn't much in the way of changes from the base game. Most factions have the same buildings, follow the same building paths, and have the same units. Now obviously, because there are so many factions added in, the mod developer did need to make specific rosters. However, the rosters are all built up from sort of the existing pool of units from the same culture. So for example, Sparta largely follows the same unit roster as the Greek city-states. Same for Athens, and then it'll be same for the sort of Gallic tribes as well. There are some differences, but it comes down to sort of the roster of units available for each culture. but not much in the way of changes there, not that it's a bad thing. Having covered the gameplay fundamentals, I now want to move on to some of the new mechanics that the mod introduces, the first one being culture. I would argue that culture has the biggest impact of any of the new mechanics introduced by this mod, just because it does have an effect on how fast you can go through the campaign. So every settlement has its own culture. As you can see here, Arretium has Greek culture, or Hellenism. I've been going in this campaign for a while, so a lot of settlements have been converted, but Arretium right now is showing Hellenism, whereas before I think it would have been Roman. Bononia is showing as Celtic paganism, 50%, and Leda is showing as Germanic paganism, 46%. So basically every faction has their own native culture, and then as you conquer settlements that do not share your culture, you will need to convert it. And the impact of this is basically that you can't recruit troops unless a settlement has been sufficiently converted, and you also need to use your own military buildings. So for example, if we go down to the settlement here, which I've just conquered, it's got a tier 4 Egyptian army barracks. I can't use this to recruit my tier 4 troops. So if I go to recruitment, I can't recruit any units here. So the first requirement of being able to recruit my own troops is to basically demolish this and then build up my own barracks, which could take about 10 turns, I think. I mean, it would be a couple of turns on the first level, 2 or 3 turns on the second, and so on. The added complication to that is that a settlement actually needs to be sufficiently converted. So if we go to Leda. So I've got a tier 3 militia barracks here, which allows me to recruit hoplites. If I want armoured hoplites, I need to upgrade that to the army barracks, which is here. And we can see. So if you upgrade it, we can get armoured hoplites, but we can see there requires Hellenism 40%. And because this settlement is only 27% Hellenism, I wouldn't be able to recruit armoured hoplites if I had that building. So I basically need to wait for the settlement to convert. So basically, overall the impact of culture is that progress becomes a lot slower when you're conquering settlements that have a different culture, because not only do you need to knock down their military buildings and build up your own, which can take about 10 to 12 turns to get to your highest level, you also need to wait for it to convert sufficiently to your culture to be able to start recruiting your high level units. So it just means that when you are in this campaign, I'm playing as Sparta, which have Greek culture. So if I proceeded north to the, I think it's mostly Celtic paganism up here, progress would be incredibly slow, because if I was to take, for example, this settlement here, I would basically need to knock down their building, build my own, and in the meantime use the forces that are taken to defend against any other attacks. And on very hard difficulty levels, you basically just get battered by waves of attacks. So yeah, it's just something to note that progress can get quite slow. Moving on to the next mechanic then is civil wars. So all generals have a loyalty stat of between 1 and 10, and additionally, if a settlement revolts, a secessionist faction or shadow faction will appear. So for example, I lost Batavium because it revolted, and that's now ruled by the Sparta secessionists. So I've done a couple of campaigns. I've never had a civil war fire because of a low loyalty stat, but I have had several revolts which have resulted in civil wars. It is quite a nice addition and just something that brings Rome Total War up to date. So just a few extra features that I wanted to mention. The developer does say that the mod's not intended to be a historical masterpiece, however, certain updates have been made. So Egypt has now been updated to the Ptolemaic Egypt, or Hellenistic Egypt, post Alexander's death, which is more historically accurate as compared to the Bronze Age Egypt that is depicted in the base game. As you can see, if you look at the eye barracks here, Egypt can now recruit units like the Phalanx Pikemen and Companion Cavalry. The Bull Warriors have been replaced by the Celt Iberian Warriors, as shown here. The Greeks fight with their spears up as opposed to in a phalanx like the Macedonians. To conclude on this mod then, I'd say it's a good mix between adding in some historical accuracy and realism, while maintaining some of the more arcade-like features of the base game. It is a much slower pace than the original due to the different cultures, but not to the extent of a mod like Europa Barbarorum. The building times are unchanged, and if you are conquering settlements of the same culture, you can progress fairly quickly. It's conquering settlements of a different culture that slows you down because you can't replenish troops as you go, and you have to rely on other settlements to provide reinforcements. This means you can't just move from settlement to settlement really quickly, and in this campaign in particular, I found it difficult to recruit fast enough to support my wars on multiple fronts. I think if you're someone who likes to blitz through campaigns, this probably isn't the mod for you. One thing I do want to say is that in the base game, all the difficulties at the start. Once you conquer a few settlements and get your economy going, it gets quite easy and you can just steamroll. Whereas in this mod, I found there was difficulty even into the later stages of the campaign because of the different cultures. But overall, I'd say the developers done a fantastic job with this mod in terms of adding in all the new factions. There's a lot more variety than in the base game, and that definitely adds immersion. I think the news about culture and not being able to recruit units from buildings of a different culture does add some realism to it, but obviously it slows down the pace of the gameplay. But that will suit some people and it won't suit others. But overall, I think it's a fantastic mod and I really enjoyed it. This is going to conclude my mod review for the Retrofit mod. I hope you enjoyed it and please stay tuned for the next one.